They live in the woods around my house. Just as I thought those things scuttered off elsewhere, they came crawling right back and let their presence be known to me. I think they know I'm inside. I fear that stepping out that door would surge a sharp feeling of dread, so much so I may struggle to breathe. My head hurts, and I felt like this since their horrid singing started echoing through the trees again. You're lucky to even be reading such right now. If it weren't for my immediate family expressing that they believe me, that I am not a madman, I dare not share this story on the internet in fear no soul would listen. It was a cold day in January, but it was set to be a good day, for it was my last in the workplace, and I was set to fly up to Vancouver later that night. Most of my relatives live near the city, and they wanted to throw a celebration. Who would I be not to accept? And so the day prior, I had already made all the preparations for the trip. The struggle that day was on the drive home. I felt tired, and the monotonous task of sitting in traffic stole most of my time. The sun started to set, and the sky shone a deep red. I flicked on my vehicle's headlights. The highway was packed due to a pileup ahead. The crashes were awful, and 7 of the 8 vehicles seemed damaged beyond repair. White tarps covered a large chunk of the road, and red was splattered upon one of the windshields. It wasn't a very welcoming scene, to say the least. It's the worst crash I've ever seen in person. I was just ecstatic to finally move past. The moon shone bright behind the towering trees. I live in a really wooded area, so at some point during the drive, everything became quiet and tranquil. I was on the last stretch of road before reaching my street, and nothing but darkness flooded the view ahead. I closed my eyes, and for a second, swerved into the other lane. A curdling screech echoed into the forest, and marks stained the concrete. I lost complete control of the vehicle. Coming towards the top of my street, my car wrapped around a tree. I was bleeding a bit, and smoke rose from beneath the car's hood. It was quiet, and an awful pain surged through my right hand. For a second I assumed it to be broken, as when I woke all was cold, and I couldn't feel a thing. Even the forest emanated a terrible, eerie stiffness. The grotesque silhouettes of trees watched as I slithered out the passenger side window. Such was hardly noticeable under the moonlight, yet in that moment, I noticed. I noticed everything. The scent of gasoline, the bumps in the concrete, the faint sparkles of melting snow, the individual shards of glass, and the flakes of steel upon the ground. I couldn't fathom how intricate the world was at that moment. I started pacing towards my house, as it was just down the street. A weight felt to be holding me down. I passed one house, then a section of thick woods, then another house. As I dragged myself along, I reached into my pockets and found my phone, to which I would then call the police. "What's your emergency?" I crashed my car atop my street. Blake Avenue. Thank God I'm not too hurt. I'm walking back home right now. "It's not blocking the road, is it? And you're able to walk home?" "It's crashed into a tree," I replied. "It shouldn't be blocking anything. And yes, I should make it back home." "Okay, where do you live?" "Somebody's on their way over now." 8 Blake Avenue. It's the last house on the street." Before the operator could reply, the phone slipped from my hands and I fell upon the concrete. Something grabbed my ankle. It slithered into the forest, dragging me along its path. Earth seeped through my teeth. Under the moonlight, the creature didn't miss a step, and its grip grew tighter and tighter. Attempting to yell out for help, only silence answered. The being, for what I could tell, was fairly small in height. I watched as the rays journeyed from one end of the den to the other. But its strength was immense, and its dry skin was warm against my own. Through the blur of the forest, I saw its faint, pale silhouette, and its voided eyes. A soul rested behind them. Not before long, it trekked across a loud, rushing stream. For a moment, I was submerged underwater. My foot became numb. As I peered through the branches into stars, struggling against such horrid force, my head bashed against a large stone, and all fell to black. A consciousness still briefly streamed through the mind. I thought to have crossed to a higher plane, and stood against nothing, and sat until I saw light once again. I woke in a dimly lit den, and my hands were tied against a large frame. A low hum echoed through the brutal walls. In the corner, a single candle was lit, its light fading into the rest of the chamber, and below, various articles scattered along the dirt floor. It smelled of sweat. Scratch marks trailed up the walls, topped by very small windows, and the moonlight barely seeped through. I was underground, it seemed, just below the surface. Everything twisted, and I started to shake the frame. Screams echoed throughout the den, with only some sourcing from myself. The knots wouldn't budge, and blood seeped from my wrists, trailing down my arm. Nothing seemed to be enough. I kept hearing unimaginable sounds from every corner, yet caught no sight of their source. Eventually, I stopped the struggle. By the time the sun woke, the candle flickered for a final time. I watched as the rays journeyed from one end of the den to the other, highlighting suspended dust. I thought of how many breaths I had left until death spoke to me. As the day passed, that grew to be the most favorable outcome. The night fell, and in the darkness ahead, I saw movement. I hadn't known exactly what it was within the shadows until a match was struck and the candle was lit shortly after. Its fingers were disturbingly long, and it looked straight into me, and its face. With every turn of its head, its accursed features became abundantly more clear. It tread closer, and so I refused to move, let alone blink. Sounds gurgled through the being's teeth. It stopped, and I could feel its breath against my neck. With its head at a tilt, it looked into my eyes, dim within the candlelight. The being screeched and began to circle around the room, rustling through the garbage on the floor. It was animalistic in movement, stepping upon all fours. I yelled yet again to no avail. Another creature entered the chamber, then another, and another. All appeared similar to the first. Some held torches, and the chamber illuminated and warm orange. They danced in many circles, singing terrible songs. The screeches were deafening, and they rustled the post to which I was tied. Then the madness suddenly stopped, and all returned to quiet. They turned towards me. One pushed all others to the side and stepped in front, its breath warm against my skin. It eyed me up and down and took hold of my wrist, and with a hearty snap, tore off my ring finger. The crowd erupted, and along with my hand, my ears started to bleed. Dreadful passion echoed through their voices, and pain surged through my own. I yelled, "Stop! Stop! What did I do to deserve such a thing?" They let out laughs and many songs, and continued to dance around the room. And once the sun started to rise, they trickled slowly out of the chamber, and the candlelight burned out once again. My breath was heavy, but hope soon awaited me. For once much of the day passed, I heard another human's voice from afar. A human. "Hello, Richard. Yell out if you hear me." "Yes," I yelled. "I'm down here in a den. There are creatures that have kept me here. Oh, thank goodness you're alive. It's your friend Derry. Keep talking to me. I'm starving, Derry. You have no idea how lovely it is to hear your voice." Derry took a few steps down into an underpass, following my voice. He passed many chambers, which were separate to mine, and stepped over piles of cloth and rubbish. And then I saw him. It felt incredible to see another person again, let alone a childhood friend. He was holding a flashlight, and he marched forward and reached for a pocket knife. With it, he cut me down, and I rested on his chest for a minute or two. A tear or two shed from my eyes. "Sorry," I said. "It's been over a day, and seeing you brings joy to my heart." "You're okay," he said. "But let's get out of here. A search was put on your name after the crash, you know, and even your family reached out in concern." He led me out of the chamber. The den was bigger than I had originally thought. Many hallways connected to create a large underground tunnel system. The place was nasty. Bones stuck out of the dirt floor, and the stench only worsened as Derry led the way forward. I was definitely not their first victim. They had been doing such for a long while. Derry looked towards me. "What happened to your hand?" "They cut off my finger, and they danced around with it, I swear to you." Derry seemed confused. "What? Who are they? And what the hell is this place?" "Derry, if I had an answer, I would have told you by now. I passed out, and when I awoke, I was already tied up." Derry led to the entrance, or rather, exit of the den, and the moonlight shone through the fog of the trees, and a huge weight was lifted from within. I was finally out of that god-awful place. So we moved on, with Derry leading the way. The snow was no longer and had finally melted away. For a change, the ambiance was actually comforting, and it was a relief to breathe some fresh air. Derry led to a fairly unkempt trail and continued on about how he'd been hiking for hours while screaming my name. Other people were also out that night looking for me. But, unfortunately, most people who go missing in my town are never found. And I think only I know the answer as to why. The path eventually crosses with a pond and continues on the other side of a small wooden bridge. Stars reflected upon the still muddy water, and the rustling of foliage was heard distantly. Owls made their presence known with their eerie calls. "So who did it?" Derry asked. "What did the guy look like?" "You'd not believe me if I told you, but it was not human." "Then was—" Derry fell to the ground, and screeches sourced from behind. There were about 15 or 20 of them. He yelled out my name and told me to run as fast as possible. I watched as the beings dragged him away. With a thick crack, they snapped off his hand, and Derry was dragged into the heart of the woods, and I ran as fast as I possibly could. Twigs snapped below my feet, and I could feel them behind me. I ended up cutting through a neighbor's backyard and made it to the street. Blake Avenue was no longer quiet. I could hear them cackling in the woods, running alongside within the shadows. And I ran till my knees started to give in. Everything was a blur. But I soon saw my home in the distance, and all started to hurt, and my mind began to spin. I refused to believe that I would make it, and I would end up with Derry, exactly how I was before. One straggled right behind me. It tugged on my clothing. Surely I was dead, but I soon reached my doorstep and twisted the key. Their screams continued in the forest outside, and I finally made it back home. I contacted the police a day later, and they found the remains of 4 people. 2 of them were missing children, and 1 was Derry. The last was another man who once lived on my street. Authorities claimed the attacks were from wolves, or possibly a bear, and refused to believe anything I tell them. All the doors in my house still remain locked. I have no idea what to do, for I have not been outside in weeks, and I refuse to step a single foot out there. And they haunt me at night. They screech and laugh at my doorstep, and I cry before falling asleep. I thought they were gone for a while too. It's been weeks, I tell you, weeks. Perhaps I have gone a little mad, but does that even matter? My hand really hurts. It's not healing well, but I don't care about anything else right now. I want those things dead, and I want to see my family. They're the only ones who even believe me. And in reflection, retiring has been the worst decision I've ever made. Well, that was pretty much it. I hope you liked the story till then. Bye-bye.